Okay, our next presenter is Paige Adam, a PhD student in music theory at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, under supervisor Ellen Bakulina. Originally from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Paige received a Bachelor of Music in 2022 and an MA in 2023. Paige is particularly drawn to Russian chamber music, whether from the late Romantic or the avant-garde, aiming to bring lesser-known composers' music, such as Anton Arensky and Sergei Taneyev, back to the spotlight. Coming from a piano background, Paige loves analyzing piano trios and quintets and writing about them. Please welcome Paige Adam, who's going to be talking about Dissonance and Loss in Alfred Schnittke's Quintet for 2 violins, viola, cello, and piano.
First one. Thank you very much. Russian composer Alfred Schnittke, best known for developing a compositional approach known as polystylism, was often referred to as a leading composer of the avant-garde in Russian periodicals. Schnittke composed his piano quintet between 1972 and 1976, following the death of his mother, to whom it was dedicated. Despite mixed critical reception, the work went on to be known as the best of Schnittke's many memorial compositions and was later arranged for orchestra. Supported by the circumstances surrounding the quintet's composition, my paper seeks to interpret various features within the first movement that represent the loss and grief Schnittke experienced following his mother's passing. I begin my paper with brief biographical information before touching on the quintet's background as well as its critical reception. Next, I move on to analysis, first offering an overview of the first movement before homing in on its key features. Finally, I regard the quintet's first movement through a grief-focused lens to demonstrate how Schnittke expresses the loss of his mother within the work. In his 63 years, Schnittke had a huge compositional output, completing 9 symphonies, countless chamber works, choral music, ballets, operas, and more, also arranging music by Shostakovich, Alvin Berg, and Scott Joplin. Further, between the years 1961 and 1984, he composed over 60 film scores in an effort to appease Soviet standards of accessible music. In the mid-1970s, Schnittke's compositions demonstrated an uptick of classical forms, namely the sonata. This period also saw the composer's revived interest in tonality, which he worked to blend with atonality, as well as a pursuit for tonal logic. Following his mother's passing in 1972, Schnittke began writing his piano quintet in her memory. Despite the first movement being swiftly composed, the composer did not return to finish the remaining movements until 1975, by then which his style had changed. The premiere took place in Tbilisi, Georgian SSR in 1976. An orchestral arrangement titled In Memoriam was premiered in 1979 by the Moscow Philharmonic Orchestra at the Moscow Conservatory. As for critical reception, despite being considered one of his best memorial works, it was not received well by some friends and colleagues, including Sofia Gubaidulina. Music theorist Ivan Moody has commented on the powerful emotions within the piano quintet, writing that, quote, the feelings of isolation and bereavement is made almost unbearable, end quote. The violinist of the Fine Arts Quartet, Ralph Evans, referred to the quintet as, quote, one of the most depressing pieces ever written. Schnittke has also commented on the relation between the quintet and his mother's passing, saying that, quote, these are real experiences of grief which I prefer not to comment on. They are of a very personal nature, end quote. Original sketches of the piano quintet also show Schnittke's attempt to include a monogram of his mother's name, which did not materialize but was a common feature of his music. Moving on to the quintet itself, Schnittke includes a legend which details 2 different kinds of notation, melodic and rhythmic. The first item is a rhythmic one, with Schnittke providing notation for accelerating through a figure. Next, a repeating fragment. The third item shows a vertical line between 2 tones indicating a chromatic cluster. The next 4 are the most important to the first movement, showing how Schnittke notates quarter tones. The last symbol is an alternative to a fermata used for sustained pitches. So before getting into the analysis, we will listen to the piano introduction, measures 1 to 29, to get a sense of the style. The score is shown on the slide, so hopefully you can see it a little bit. The recording is by the Borodin Quintet with Ludmila Berlinsky on piano, and the excerpt is just over 2 minutes. Oh, sorry, did not mean to smack into the microphone. Okay, now getting into the analysis, let us identify the key features which make up the movement. The most prominent of these features being the motive that opens the work and as well as appears throughout, as you likely noticed in the listening. The motive is shown on this slide. This example is taken from measures 1 and 2. As you can see, the motive consists of 3 pitches, C sharp, D, and B sharp, creating a chromatic cluster with a range of a diminished third. The motive moves exclusively by semitone, beginning in the middle, moving up a semitone, down another semitone, and then back to its beginning pitch, creating a circular back and forth motion. Beginning and ending on the same pitch also creates a sort of palindrome, allowing the motive to remain recognizable despite whatever motion occurs in the middle. This is proven by Schnittke's use of the motive in retrograde, which I explore later. The motive's small range also allows Schnittke to emphasize its dissonance in canon presentation, which I will also come back to. The following table demonstrates each occurrence of the motive within the 74 measure movement. Each column represents 5 measures. Each of the rows represent an instrument with violin 1 at the top, followed by violin 2, viola, cello, and piano at the bottom. Each red box represents the motive and appears in the row assigned to the instrument which plays it. So this table shows that the piano plays the opening motive from measures 1 to 4, and again from measures 5 to 9. In measure 25, it sounds once more in the piano, this time for only 2 measures. The motive is presented in the strings for the next 40 measures between bits of other material. It is presented in piano one last time. In total, 39 measures contain the motive, or parts of it, which is just over half of the movement, or 52%. I would now like to explore the motive's presentation throughout the course of the movement. The following table is a more complex version of the previous one, with different colors representing different features. So first, the boxes remain in the same place, showing where the motive appears. Red boxes signify the motive as is, or right side up, as I first showed. Blue boxes symbolize the motive in retrograde. This shows that while the violin 1 and viola play the original motive, the violin 2 and cello are playing it in retrograde simultaneously. Because the motive begins and ends on the same pitch, it is not immediately clear what is going on. In fact, the strings are in unison until the second beat of measure 31. Further, yellow indicates that Schnittke uses quarter tones, while white shows the motive is presented in canon. So this slide shows the motive in its original form, once again in red, and the inverted in blue. Note that due to the motive's small range, the inverted version is actually the exact same as the retrograde. So let's hear how these sound together. So here we have the motive with Schnittke's quarter tones, and to the right, the presentation of the motive in canon, beginning with the violin 1, then the second viola, and lastly cello. Note that the piano does not partake in these variations, as it is, of course, unable to play quarter tones. So we'll hear these examples a little later. I now shift my focus to interpretation to consider how various features of the movement may be interpreted to represent Schnittke's loss of his mother. Key components I focus on include repetition, dissonance, and how it is treated, what I refer to as the fading heartbeat, and lastly, the piece's final pitches. The following slides will break down each of these features and detail my interpretation, followed by listening examples. So returning to the piece's main motive for final time, I regard repetition as a strong contender for supporting a grief-focused interpretation. The motive seems to present a sense of restlessness, never getting comfortable or feeling settled, winding around a central pitch. The back and forth motion can be said to be reminiscent of dealing with loss in itself. Similarly to the motive's own circularity, with grief, one may find themselves circling through the same emotions over and over. Ruminating may lead to the feeling of being stuck. Further, Schnittke's use of rhythm supports this idea. In every occurrence, Schnittke offsets the motives by small note values, such as the 16th note or 8th note triplet. As we heard in previous listening examples, the result is an intense disconnect among the string instruments, with the already dissonant sonorities being further muddled and confused by contradictory rhythms. I expand on this further in the next section. The motive's constant repetition alone can easily be interpreted to represent grief. Schnittke cannot get away from the motive, nor can he escape the feelings of loss. Adding the rhythmic variation creates an even more chaotic and dissonant soundscape that to me represents deep pain. Now I'd like to further consider Schnittke's treatment and application of dissonance. As I've previously explored, Schnittke uses dissonance in various ways within the movement, with the most prominent being the delivery of the work's main motive, with Schnittke setting semitones against each other. However, later in the movement, even the semitone is not dissonant enough, which leads Schnittke towards quarter tones. The most dissonant segment of the piece entails the motive being presented in quarter tones in the string instruments. Oftentimes, they play within a quarter tone of each other, creating dissonances much harsher than those we are accustomed to in Western music. Schnittke perhaps felt that the semitone was simply not dissonant or jarring enough to express how he was feeling. Instead, he was forced to go outside the norm in search of something, dare I say, worse. Furthermore, not a single dissonance is resolved. The strings are in constant, various rhythms, refusing a resting point. To further emphasize this disconnect, each instrument's rhythm varies slightly, as I previously touched on. While the violin 1 plays the original rhythm, the viola extends each pitch by a quarter note triplet. The violin 2, playing in retrograde, extends each pitch by a 16th note, and the cello by 1.5 beats. Although I do not further pursue rhythm-related interpretation, metric dissonance is also a strong feature of this movement and a sure contender for interpretation. Another intense application of dissonance in the movement is Schnittke's quarter tone canon. In an earlier presentation of the motive, each of the instruments begin on a unison. But in the canon, Schnittke transposes each of the entries down a whole tone so that not even a split second of consonance emerges. He first presents it normally before including quarter tones the second time, shocking and disorienting the listener. To combine such a classical form, the canon, with quarter tones blends atonality and known forms in a unique way. The same way dissonances remain unresolved, one may find that there is no relief, no endpoint or finish line, and no quick fix to grief. Let us listen to the strings canon. I find that one of the clearest references to loss is found in the piano's extended ostinato, ranging measures 45 to 65, during which the piano plays a repeating quarter note on the same pitch on each beat. This is what I previously referred to as the fading heartbeat. The repeating quarter notes, accompanied by a syncopated oscillation between C-flat and B-flat in the piano's lowest register, begins in the background while the strings continue playing the main motive. In measure 50, the strings play the motive in quarter tones, harshening the dissonances. The motive comes to an end in measure 55, with Schnittke adding that the string players should hold their final pitch for an arbitrary duration, or to the end of the bow. The motive's final pitches here are D 3/4 flat in the violin 1, C in the violin 2, B quarter sharp in the viola, and another D 3/4 flat in the cello, creating a deeply disturbing and jarring sound. Next, the piano soars above, decrescendoing as much as possible until just the sound of the keys can be heard, as is noted in the score. The movement's moderato tempo, together with the repeating singular pitch, is further suggestive of a heartbeat. Directly following the heartbeat, the strings present the motive in canon and then in quarter tones. I previously commented that the piano, of course, cannot participate due to its inability to produce quarter tones. Additionally, the quarter tone canon directly follows the piano's death or fading heartbeat. Moreover, Schnittke's choice to grant the performer the freedom to extend these quarter notes as they please may also support the grief angle. This creates the possibility that no two performances are the same. It also creates unpredictability. Each time, the fading out or dying heartbeat fades on its own terms, much like that of actual death. A final reference to grief I would like to touch on is the last two pitches of the movement, B flat and B natural. Despite these two pitches obviously not creating a consonant octave, I feel that the extreme spacing allows the ear to cut the difference and accept these pitches as a resting point. Perhaps the listener is so desperate for relief, they are willing to accept this near octave as close enough. On the other hand, seeing the score and knowing that this is in fact not an octave, one may speculate that Schnittke chose the semitone to represent an unrestful ending. The motive is also transposed from the original, now a minor third down, beginning and ending on A sharp instead of C sharp. To me, the combination of these features represent how grief changes someone. Although you may be the same person or motive, loss changes you. Further, it suggests that there is no relief. Grief does not allow you to find solace so easily, and you're forced to settle with an almost octave instead. I'll play the last few measures and let you consider this interpretation for yourself. In conclusion, Schnittke uses dissonance in numerous ways in the piano quintet's first movement that can be interpreted to represent experiences of grief. The extraordinarily harsh dissonances, in combination with other features not limited to infatuation with a single motive and a fading heartbeat, are highly suggestive of Schnittke's unique reaction to his mother's passing. This reading is further supported by academic sources, asserting that following the motives or the completion of the first movement, Schnittke did not return to work for years, suggesting that the moderato took so much out of him that he had to recover before returning. Listening with these ideas in mind offers a completely different listening experience, or at least I know it did for me. It took us from a difficult piece to a deep, meaningful work full of painful emotions. Oh, thank you.
Are there any questions? Sorry. Yes.
Right. Yes. Hi, thank you so much. Very interesting paper. Obviously, very challenging piece to listen to. I'm curious about, this might be more of a mythological question, I'm really sorry. I'm curious about the reaction from other composers or from contemporaries you mentioned, like Lina, who said that this piece was unbearable, like too much. And I guess my question to you is, in your interpretation or in your sort of analysis, do you think that there's such thing as too much in terms of affect? Because when music is used in such a way, especially in abstraction, to really evoke almost impossible to express emotions, what can that tell us, I guess, about like this kind of musical affect in general, also to consideration of your analysis. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for the question. In terms of can there be too much affect? Probably, yeah, especially if you're not familiar with the piece. Like the first time I listened to this, it was not enjoyable for me, to be quite honest. But I feel that especially with avant-garde stuff and with Schnittke stuff, if when you do the work, it becomes more interesting. So, but I don't know, can there be too much? I can't say, I'm not a composer. Thank you.
First, as a joke, I'd like to say that Gubelin probably said it was too much. I would say that Schnittke probably loved him a lot more than Gubelin did. I'm kidding. But for my actual question, I was wondering, since this is so focused so much on grief, if you thought about correlating the musical signifiers with Russian thoughts on grief, or more generic things like Kubler-Ross cycles, where you start with denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I was wondering if you looked at correlating that.
Thank you for the question. I haven't looked into that personally. I know that that's definitely something that's been considered in this piece, according to YouTube comments anyways, throughout the course. Also, the orchestration is really excellent, and there's tons of space for stuff there. I'm not super familiar with like Russian psychology type stuff like that. I think that would, if I wanted to go further with this paper, I would absolutely look into that. So thank you for your suggestion.
Other questions, comments, thoughts?
What brought you to examine this work?
Well, I was in an extended tonality class, and I wanted to find something I couldn't find other analyses about. So I found this, and then when I wrote it for that class, it was mainly just analysis with a little bit of interpretation tacked on at the end. But then when I presented to my class, some other people had commented on the grief stuff, so I thought, you know what, that actually makes a lot of sense. Let me do that. So yeah, part of it, and part of the reason I have my interest is because I don't really see other people writing about it. So I want to fill that gap and make people interested. Thank you.
My question. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.